Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story tonight is on domestic terrorism in the United States. Saturday's murder of two Black Americans in a Boston suburb is being investigated as a hate crime. Nathan Allen shot and killed retired Massachusetts State Police Trooper David Green and U.S. Air Force veteran Romana Cooper. This was after crashing a stolen truck into a building in the suburb of Winthrop on Saturday afternoon. Allen was fatally shot by the police moments later. Suffolk County District Attorney Rachel Rollins said Allen had written about the superiority of the white race and had drawn swastikas. She also said that after the crash, he specifically targeted Green and Cooper walking past several other white people. Cooper was shot 3 times in the back. Green was murdered execution style, with 4 shots to his head and 3 to his torso. Donald Trump held his first big campaign-style rally since leaving the White House. Here is the former president speaking on Saturday in Ohio.
If you win Ohio, and you win Florida, and you win Iowa, and all by big numbers, big win in Florida, all by big numbers. When that happens, nobody's ever lost. Nobody's ever lost. This was the scam of the century, and this was the crime of the century.
Not unlike his presidential campaign in 2020, his messaging included anti-immigrant and anti-Latino bigotry. Save America is Trump's new campaign slogan, but Make America Great Again was still incorporated in his speech.
We will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And we will make America great again. Thank you, Ohio. Thank you. Thank you very much.
At the rally, Trump supporter Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene attacked Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez again. She called Ocasio-Cortez, who is a Latina, the little communist from New York City. Meanwhile, in Trump's home state of Florida, his new home state, 2 pastors were arrested for disorderly conduct in the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill. James Varnell Cusick Jr. and his son Casey Cusick both lead the Global Outreach Ministry Church in Melbourne, Florida. The death toll after the collapse of a Florida apartment tower has risen to 9. It has been more than 3 days since the building collapsed as its residents slept. A makeshift memorial is honoring those missing. It features their names and faces on a chain-link fence at the staging ground for rescue teams and equipment. A tunnel is being dug to look for the 152 people still missing. This is Mikel Noriega, grandson of a woman who was in the building.
So my grandmother was in the building over here when it went down. She lived in the building. And when we arrived about 2:30 a.m. the night this happened, it was my father's mother, my grandmother, that was in the building. And my father happened to be walking, and he found this, which was actually a birthday card for my grandmother. Well, this has been going on for days, so quite honestly, we don't know what to expect, but I can tell you that we're definitely very hopeful. We're holding on to faith, and we just believe that this is not over yet.
Behind the fence, a block away, smoke drifted up from the rubble of the Champlain Tower South building. The United States is carrying out air raids on Iran-backed militia in Syria and Iraq. The attacks mark the second time President Joe Biden has ordered the retaliatory bombing on armed groups since taking office. The White House said yesterday the attacks were in response to drone strikes against U.S. personnel and facilities in Iraq. In a statement, the U.S. military said it targeted operational and weapons storage facilities at 2 locations in Syria and 1 in Iraq. It did not say whether anyone was killed or injured. Meanwhile, civilians in northwest Syria face catastrophe if the United Nations Security Council fails to renew a cross-border relief operation. In the city of Idlib, much-needed humanitarian relief supplies are brought in through a single post on the border of Syria and Turkey. But the United Nations mandate that regulates the operations will expire on July 10th, and its renewal remains uncertain. Thousands are mourning Palestinian rights activist Nizar Banat, who died in police custody last week. Banat died while in the custody of the Palestinian Authority, led by President Mahmoud Abbas. Protesters marched for a fourth day demanding President Abbas step down. Labor Minister Nasri Abdul-Jaish of the Palestinian People's Party will resign today. Abu Jaish's left-wing party had decided to withdraw from the Fatah-led PA government. It says this is due to its lack of respect for laws and public freedoms. Banat's family said he died on Thursday shortly after security forces stormed his house and violently arrested him. Banat was known for social media videos denouncing alleged corruption within the Palestinian Authority. On Saturday, hundreds took to the streets of Ramallah, the seat of the PA in the occupied West Bank, calling for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to resign. The Palestinian Journalists Union condemned attacks by security forces against journalists covering the protest. Anger has been building against Mahmoud Abbas, who postponed elections indefinitely back in April. Human Rights Watch has also accused the Palestinian Authority of contributing to apartheid by Israel. The Palestinian Authority exercises limited powers over some of the West Bank, which has been occupied by Israel since 1967. The United Kingdom has appointed a British Muslim as its health minister as the country grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic. Sajid Javid has taken over from Matt Hancock as Health Secretary for England. Javid is considered a political heavyweight. He's been the country's Chancellor of the Exchequer and Home Secretary. He's also held 3 other cabinet posts. Javid was appointed following Hancock's resignation. He stepped down for breaking social distancing guidelines. Javid has been the Member of Parliament since 2010. He's one of 5 sons of parents who moved to the United Kingdom from Pakistan. He has described himself as a non-practicing Muslim. A string of anti-Muslim attacks have revealed the growing problem of Islamophobia in Canada. The latest came last Friday in Saskatoon, where Mohammed Kashif was stabbed in the back several times and had his beard cut off. Kashif has been out for an early morning walk. This comes just days after a man in Edmonton allegedly grabbed a woman's hijab, knocked her unconscious, and threatened another with a knife. It also comes less than a month after 4 members of a Muslim family were murdered by a white supremacist in London, Ontario. Hate crimes researcher Irfan Chaudhry said anti-Muslim attacks increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. In an interview with Global TV, he explained that this is because less personal connection builds bigger echo chambers online. Chaudhry said while most of these attacks are verbal or done through graffiti, the physical ones stem from false beliefs in online discussions. He called for social media platforms to better regulate what users post, as they do with COVID-19 information. Chaudhry also said more people need to step in if they see a physical attack occurring. Australia's largest city, Sydney, entered a 2-week lockdown. Sydney's usually bustling harbourside restaurants were shuttered, with the city streets deserted on Saturday. The lockdown was put into place to contain an outbreak of the Delta variant of COVID, first discovered in India. Here is Chris Kirketos, who felt a really bad case of deja vu.
Yeah, everyone's damp, down, they're bored, upset. Yeah. It's just complete ghost town again. So it's, on the pure mathematics of it, we should be closed, but we're just doing it for a morale sort of thing.
Keep going.
Just keep going.
In related news, Bangladesh announced that it would impose a new national lockdown starting today due to the Indian variant. Only medical-related transport will be allowed. Crowds of migrant workers and families rushed to reach home before the lockdown. The Delta variant has also fueled rising cases in Russia. St. Petersburg on Saturday reported the country's highest daily COVID-19 death toll. Faint apricot sweets are coming back to Syria. When the Arab Spring led to the Arab Nightmare, Syrians and Syrian apricots started disappearing. Here's a story of Qamar al-Din coming back by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk.
Qamaruddin is a sweet made from the apricot. But Qamaruddin was nowhere to be found since apricots disappeared. It is not just the apricots. Syrians are also disappearing, in the torture cells and in bombed cities. The story of apricots is intertwined with the story of Syria. Syrians peacefully demanded freedom during the Arab Spring. But the Syrian dictator, Bashar al-Assad, started bombing them. That is how the Arab Spring became a nightmare instead of freedom. That resulted in the civil war, which is still simmering. Several countries got involved. Syria was devastated. They started fleeing for safety. Syrians became the largest refugee population in the world. Bilal's family has been in the apricot business for generations. Decade after decade, they made the popular flat-pressed, sun-dried sweet known as Qamaruddin. In 2008, after pro-government forces retook the area, Bilal returned to his factory. He had to start from scratch.
The Zuberi family is one of the biggest producers of Qamar al-Din and exporters to Egypt and other Arab countries. We used to produce 1/3 of Syria's Qamar al-Din supply. Syria used to produce 15,000 to 20,000 tons of Qamar al-Din, but now it's only 3,000 to 4,000 tons. That's Syria's national production, so it's dropped to 1/5 of what it used to be.
The sweet apricot sheets are made from fruit juice mixed with sugar. Then they are cooked and spread over wooden boards covered in olive oil. The boards are then left to dry in the sun. The fruity sheets are especially popular during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The Zuberi family business is finally up and running again, but unfortunately not with apricots. They are patiently waiting for their newly planted trees to bear fruit. Trees take time. They are using imported orange nectar now. God willing, we'll live to eat from what we planted. But if we don't, hopefully our children will. One day the apricot will be back. The true Qamaruddin will be ready then. All Syrians will be back, free at last, Insha'Allah.
Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you and you could be me for just 1 hour, if we could find a way to get inside each other's minds, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi held his first meeting with so-called leaders from Indian-occupied Kashmir on Thursday. Since his August 5, 2019 decision to strip the region of its special status. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Saliha Farouk. Over to you, Saliha.
Thank you so much. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Junaid Ahmed, who is the director for the Center for Global Dialogue, as well as a professor of religion and politics at the Lahore University of Management Sciences, as well as at the School of Advanced Studies at the University of Management and Technology. Junaid, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Assalamu alaikum, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Wa alaikum salam. Now, as you might know, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is calling for elections in Jammu and Kashmir to happen soon. Does this mean that Kashmiri political leaders will have a chance to participate in this election? And how can that happen when so many political leaders are actually imprisoned for a long time now?
I think the context of this is incredibly important. However, we can get to that in a moment. I think that the Indian government and Narendra Modi and the government of this right-wing BJP party has now, after 2 years of the basically removal of the autonomous status of Kashmir, now because of both internal but largely external geopolitical factors, is feeling the pressure to do something in Kashmir to restore some semblance of political activity within Kashmir. Now, of course, the only leaders that it invited were the traditional pro-India establishment, quote-unquote, mainstream politicians from Kashmir that it had also detained, but but Modi had invited them. They, of course, said their statements. They made the case that you need to restore the status. But the fact remains for most Kashmiris the larger problem, which we can get into, of how the Indian state is treating the Kashmiris, continues to kind of militarily occupy in the most militarized way in Kashmir, that these elections and these polls, I mean, they're not even calling it elections, they call it polls, is just a means, it's also a facade to demonstrate to Pakistan, to the United States. The Biden administration has also made some statements about this, that they are allowing some level of political democracy and openness. But for most Kashmiris, they're incredibly skeptical about this as just being, as I said, a facade rather than anything substantive that will allow Kashmiris to really genuinely elect leaders and express the sentiment that they have through that political representation.
So just building upon your statement about the polls, Prime Minister Modi had recently met with political leaders to encourage this idea of an election in the public's eye. However, Kashmir's legitimate leadership was not invited to this meeting. Keeping this in mind, how credible is this meeting, and how credible would elections be in terms of finding a solution when Kashmir's indigenous leadership is not even considered for this meeting?
Right, absolutely. And this, again, to re-emphasize what I just said, the fact is that the three politicians that Modi invited from Kashmir are all the traditional pro-India establishment politicians that, yes, were also detained, but of course, it's well known now that particularly by this point, but for a very long time, have been essentially considered as in India's, a political class of agents in Kashmir that will consistently express a political position that will keep the Kashmiris aligned with New Delhi. So I think that first of all that's people are seeing through that, despite the fact that the statements, of course, by these Kashmiri leaders after they have met with Modi, they have said that we have emphasized that they need to restore the Article 370 and 35A that gave Kashmir the special status of autonomy. But these politicians have never been trusted by the majority of Kashmiris in the first place. And you're absolutely right that the other political parties that have been much more representative and the political forces, because often the Indian government will not even allow them to actually be a political party in the formal sense. Those forces and those parties were not invited and will continue to be marginalized and often continue to be characterized as terrorists. So this is the fundamental problem. Like I said, it's a question of Modi and the BJP government's attempt to portray this as a moment in which they are allowing some type of political expression, allowing so-called elections, even though, again, like I said, they're calling it polls, which is ridiculous. And all of this taking place, of course, under heavy militarized occupation. I mean, which is nonsensical.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the BJP party, and they are currently the party in power in Indian government. They're currently advocating for something called delimitation in this so-called election that's coming up. And what this essentially means is adding constituencies to India's union territories. My question is, do you think that the BJP is trying to gain seats in this election in Jammu and Kashmir? And what do you think is the agenda of the BJP?
Yes, I think that this is part of the program, that the political program that's on the agenda for the BJP in managing these polls, elections, whatever you want to call them, and in some ways it's part of the larger project, even though, again, as I said, right now it's to assuage the fears of and the criticisms, obviously coming from Islamabad, but also from Washington and from Beijing and so forth. But it's to actually the larger project that has began and that has always been on the agenda of the BJP has been to take over Kashmir, to remove this autonomous status, not even give it statehood. And now what they have also done after removing that status is bifurcating Kashmir, their Indian occupied Kashmir, from the valley, Jammu, and from Ladakh. And making them provinces. So this is all part of kind of manipulating. And I think it's important for our viewers and listeners to understand is that this is very, very similar to actually what's going on in Palestine. What we have now is an overt attempt of the Indian government to engage in settler colonialism. With the removal of that status, now we have a bunch of administrative laws that the Indian government has also passed, allowing more and more Indian and Hindus to go in and get part, which they could not do before, and take property and all sorts of other things. And it's fundamentally about changing the demographics of the population of Kashmir. And so you have both the situation of now always of a military occupation. You've always had a situation of an apartheid situation in which Kashmiris have been treated horribly from the very inception of modern state of India. And now you have direct settler colonialism happening. And so then you can have these polls and elections and so on, but they're taking place in a context in which you will have these not only the traditional pro-India politicians, but a large influx of individuals from India, Hindus pro-BJP, that will go into the territories, into Kashmir, and yes, they will be somehow they will be enabled to be the quote unquote legitimate leadership of Kashmir. And so this is part of the facade, again, presented to all of these, to the outside world, of how they're allowing political democracy within Kashmir. The one thing to be stated, like I said, is the overall context. There was the increasing kind of thawing of ties with Pakistan since February, when they reaffirmed the ceasefire agreement on the line of control since 2003. Of course, earlier this month, Prime Minister Imran Khan said that he would be willing to resume talks with New Delhi, but on the condition that the New Delhi restores that provincial autonomy to Kashmir. And so that, on the one hand, on the other hand, the very tense relationship with Beijing on the other side, the eastern border in Ladakh. So the pressure from there, and now the Biden administration. So the cozy, chummy relationship that Modi had with Trump no longer is the case. So that's not to say that the U.S. administration is abandoning India. They still have a very close relationship, but it's a carrot and stick kind of relationship. And so the Biden administration has also said that, look, we're still willing to give you all of the arms that you can deal with Beijing and so on, but make some type of amendments to your policy in Kashmir. So this is all part of that overall context in which this is taking place. But like I said, when you have occupation, apartheid, and now direct settler colonialism, this all becomes very shallow to say that you're going to have now elections within this context.
Thank you for your valuable time. We're here today with Junaid Ahmed, who is the director for the Center for Global Dialogue, as well as a professor of religion and politics. I appreciate your time, Junaid. Back to the news studio.
Thank you, Saleha and Junaid Ahmed. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
President Biden and a bipartisan group of senators announced they have reached a deal. This is on a plan to invest $1.2 trillion to update the nation's infrastructure. The deal focuses on things like roads and bridges, rail links, and expanding broadband internet access. To discuss the state of infrastructure in America, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid for a detailed analysis. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. America rarely talks to each other nowadays, so it was a surprise to hear there is a bipartisan agreement and a deal on infrastructure. why infrastructure is so critical for us, that President Obama was talking about it, President Trump promised to have it, and President Biden has it in his agenda as well. What is infrastructure which is so badly needed that everyone wants to have it? To discuss that with us is a professor of civil engineering at Northwestern University, Joseph Schofer. Welcome to Muslim Network.
Thank you. I'm glad to be talking to you today.
So why America is so concerned about infrastructure? There seems to be bipartisan agreement. We don't agree on anything. We don't agree on voting rights. We don't agree on gun control. We don't agree on crime, but we agree on infrastructure. Is it your power, Professor?
It is all powerful, and it's a sad state of affairs as you describe it. In part, infrastructure is neutral because from a distance, at least, it doesn't seem to be about people or partisan politics. But from the point of view of the economy and from my point of view as an engineer, infrastructure is the structural background that supports the processes and activities of the nation. So it's the connectivity that's provided by the transportation system. It's the system that produces and distributes electrical power, that distributes water, distributes other forms of energies. And without good infrastructure, it's really hard to maintain the productivity and the quality of the economy, but also the connectivity of the social system. So now we're talking about broadband being a part of infrastructure. A decade ago, nobody thought about broadband as infrastructure, but it performs very much the same function as the physical transportation system. So we want those services, that we want those capabilities to live our lives, to be comfortable, and to achieve and to grow economically and socially.
Okay, being from the sort of a Rust Belt of Chicago, I wonder if professors of engineers and all that still think of infrastructure in terms of hardware, or software has some place in there.
Well, software has a place in there if you start to think about the way infrastructure works today, that there's almost no element of importance in our infrastructure system that isn't one way or another dependent on software. There's software to design it, software to produce it, software, importantly, to manage it, to monitor, to make sure that it's performing safely. So software is important now, will certainly grow in importance in the future. I think for the most part, if you talk to people in the infrastructure field, they probably won't put much emphasis on software, and they think about pouring concrete and building bridges. It strikes me that what's really important is you plan for it and you invest in and you maintain infrastructure, that you think about functionality. What is it? What are the services that we need? And what are the facilities and support systems that we need to get those services? So kind of a human-centered, life-centered approach to infrastructure design is really what we need going into the future.
Professor Schofer, tell me, if you have $1 trillion, say I'm into that, how would you, what are the top things which you want to do with that?
Well, typically what people in the infrastructure field think about is fix it first. And I think that's a mantra that you hear coming out of the Biden administration. By the way, it's nothing new. It's come out of administrations going farther back than certainly than Obama. Every president has come in the last 50 years and talked about infrastructure. So an argument for fixing it first is that we really haven't done a very good job of maintaining the infrastructure that we already have. And if we take a big chunk of that $1 trillion and build new and ignore the old, we're wasting resources and we're not solving the problems that can be solved in a relatively shorter period of time. So I would think about that, fixing it first. I'd be cautious about new investments, partly because technologies are changing so rapidly that it's very hard to know not only what we'll need a decade or 2 decades from now, but what opportunities will be in front of us at that point in time. So I'd be a little bit cautious, for example, about building a lot of new highway capacity, which people are interested in doing because we have congestion today and new capacity will presumably give us some relief in the near term. But I don't know what we're going to need during the lifetime of those highways, and so I'd be cautious there. And today in America, and really in any country, I'd be concerned about two other things that are important and I think sometimes difficult to deal with. One is equity, fairness in the distribution, not of the infrastructure, but of the functionality of the services that we get from that infrastructure. And the second important priority is the environment. And I would tie to the environment the critical importance of maintaining the resilience of our infrastructure and the services it provides, particularly in the face of what it clearly appears to be changing climate.
We being in a society and taking a pride in capitalism, how come the private sector doesn't seem to have a bigger role in terms of infrastructure? They just wait for the government contract and pass a budget. Everybody promises, take money, do something, and then sit there until next time. So why the business community, private sector, does not have an ongoing role to play when it comes to infrastructure?
Well, let me try to give you a two-part answer to that. The easy part is, if you want to see an example of where the private sector takes a major role in infrastructure and makes a substantial profit in the process, you need to look at the US rail industry. So US freight rail, and I'm not talking at all about passenger rail, which is not much to be proud of in the United States, but the freight rail system is entirely in private hands. It makes a good return on its investment, and it has a very direct incentive to maintain the condition and quality and performance of the infrastructure. It does that very well. So take that, let's translate that over to the highway system, or even more difficult, to the mass transit system. If I want to bring private sector into that part of the infrastructure domain, then I need to find a way for them to make a reasonable return on investment. And right now, either I'm not willing to do it, that is, I'm not willing to toll all of the road network or charge a user fee for all of the network, or I'm not able to do that. And that might be the case in the public transit system. So public transit, there's really no way for a private investor to make a profit from the fair income in private investment. Why? You wouldn't want that to happen, because if you priced private transit at a level that covers its cost, you would, for example, in the Chicago area, at least double the transit fares. Politically, we wouldn't do it. Socially, we wouldn't do it. And what would happen is we would drive people off the system who really need it, who depend on it. So we need to find a way, if you're going to bring private sector and private money into the infrastructure business, you need to find a way for these entities to make money, to get a return on their investment, to make a profit. We could do that. We could do it on the highway side by implementing a user fee system where you would essentially pay by the mile and by the time of day and by the location where you use the road network. It's possible. It's done in some places, and we could do it. Politically, decision makers are fearful of going in that direction. So we could talk a lot more about that. That's a very interesting and promising way to bring the private sector in. Or we could talk about public-private partnerships where we, in effect, contract with somebody to build and run the public transit system, and we pay them with what we call availability payments. That is, we, in effect, lease the services over time. So where does the money come from? Money comes from public subsidies. So the transit system everywhere in the United States is already substantially subsidized by the public, but it's provided also by the public. So we could deliver that subsidy to a private investor, a private operator, and of course continue to charge fares. So those are two income streams to do that. There are some examples around the country where we're doing that. It works very well. The advantage of bringing private sector in is one can write a contract in this public-private partnership, which pushes the risk across the table to the person who's better able to accept it. So private contractors may be much better able to accept the risk of cost overruns, and it forces them, it holds their feet to the fire, if you will, to do a good job of planning and design and construction. And in the delivery of these services, the private sector has the possibility of being more efficient and possibly either delivering a better product or delivering a good product more cheaply. We are just not doing that.
Now, we had a major issue about Flint, Michigan, that people could not have good drinking water. And it became a news, and it took about 6 years. Now they have clean water available, but it costed $1 billion. So is it an issue of governance when it comes to city level infrastructure issue?
Most of the money that's spent on infrastructure in the United States is spent either, some of it is spent by the private sector, we talked about that, but most of the money is spent by state and local governments, not by the federal government. It's a useful thing to keep that in mind when you look at the Biden program, because it's a lot of money, but it isn't as much money as we're already spending. I think the issue is that government does not do a good job of maintaining the system, of, if you will, feeding the animals, because if you don't feed the animals, if you don't pay to maintain the infrastructure system, the animals die or the infrastructure deteriorates, and we're in the situation that we're in now. So part of the Biden program is to put something like $85 billion into mass transit in cities. What will it do? It will begin to work down the backlog of projects that should have been done before, but weren't done before. So why weren't they done? We didn't have the money. We wouldn't charge the fares or raise the taxes to pay for them, and or we wouldn't allocate the money to these kinds of projects. So I think part of this is human nature, that it's very hard for people, it's very hard for governments to make a decision to kind of tighten your belt and invest in the future, raise the funds to invest in the future, because my personal viewpoint is that the average time horizon for a political decision maker is about half the period between elections. So people are always looking at what's going to happen at the next elections. At the federal level, for example, the gasoline tax hasn't been raised since 1993. I don't think there's anything in your life or my life that's held the same price since 1993. But members of the Congress and the administration absolutely have made clear statements in the last few days that they're not willing to raise the motor fuel tax. So what is the motor fuel tax? It's the money that pays for maintaining the highways. And if you don't charge enough to do that, if you can't keep up with the need, then the facilities deteriorate. And I think you have the same kind of thing in the clean water example, that sometimes you're looking at a problem that takes a big chunk of money to solve, but once you've solved it for a long period of time. And my observation is it's all too easy for decision makers, elected and appointed officials, to be short-sighted in their management choices.
Professor Schofer, how much of this infrastructure conversation and bipartisanship is driven by the concern about the challenges posed by China?
I don't know that I have the perspective to give you a good answer on that, but my sense is that sometimes we look for arguments to support a position that may or may not be all that strong. I don't think that the competitiveness with China is irrelevant, but if China weren't there, I don't think the need goes away, and we can use the money. We could use the money productively. China gives us a good target to focus on. It attracts some attention. Equity is another target. Climate change is another target. And so my own view is that political leadership will look for the arguments that will support moving in the direction that they want to move.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Schofer. It was nice talking to you.
I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid and Professor Schofer. Our nation's roads really need an uplift. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.